all-round team ever? Was it the West Indies in the 70s, 80s?
Simple.
Lancashire in the 70s?
West Indies.
When you say all round,
West Indies.
what do you mean by all round?
Oh, no, that's throwing it because you're going to say, they haven't got a spinner.
I'm going to say they're not as all round as some other teams, but I want to know what
who's
he
the
means.
best team?
West Indies.
If you were to put them up
West
against
Indies.
each other,
West Indies.
who would win?
West Indies.
So who are the?
I'm only going to go with the bowlers. And there were 4 or 5 bowlers queuing up to get in.
You don't want Warren, McGrath, Lee, Gillespie.
Not against the West Indies. They'll blow them away.
So
West Indies will blow them away.
With Gilchrist at 7.
But blow them away.
I don't know. I think the West Indies side isn't as strong in the batting, and they don't have a spinner.
Viv Richards, Clive Lloyd, Gordon Greenidge, Desmond Haynes. You don't think that's...
No, I think the top 5 is great.
Yeah.
I think 6 and 7 is
Jeffrey Dujon.
Well, Jeffrey Dujon averages about half of what Gilchrist does, and had about a third of the impact.
Yeah, he'd catch more than Gilly.
He would. I give you that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's hard to go past the fact that Australia bat a little bit deeper.
This is an Australian, by the way.
But if
you played with a couple of the West Indians.
I did.
So
you're basically West Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your brother is Clive Lloyd.
Yeah. He's been mentioned before as that. He's Lloyd's brothers. Colin Croft. What a handful. Joel Garnett, Malcolm Marshall, Andy Roberts.
I don't think it's not a great side.
Waiting in the wings, Wayne Daniel, Sylvester Clark, who the quickest I've ever seen, Sylvester Clark. They were fabulous.
Okay, so
4 teams away.
During their really strong periods, which was a long time, memory serves, West Indies struggled against Pakistan, I think.
But Pakistan were a great team as well.
They were a great team, and Australia struggled against India in
India. Yeah.
So that suggests possibly, although Pakistan had some pretty good fast bowlers at the time.
I think Australia had a much higher win percentage, but there were more games. But that's also because they tried to win more. Because West Indies, it went in the 80s, people in 70s.
Australia are a great side.
Yeah, they weren't trying to win as much.
But there was also that lurch towards, we mentioned this in a show with Steve Harmison, it was, during the 80s, I would say it was more of an even playing field where everyone was kind of amateurs, kind of.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Australia became professionals.
Yeah.
It's a huge advantage.
And it's a big advantage, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't quite a level playing field. So the West Indies were winning at a time when it was a level playing field.
But they were basically the most professional side in their era because they played with Packer, they played in league cricket, they played in county cricket. Yeah. So they did actually play as professionals.
They had a trainer. They had the first trainer.
Yeah. They had a fitness person going with them who taught them about core fitness when I don't know if in 1979 anyone even had discussed core fitness.
Dennis Waite.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Okay, well, let's break it down.
Okay.
Batting, bowling.
He did say all round.
Fielding. But also spin, right?
Well, with no spin in the West Indies.
Yeah, I give you the 4 fast bowlers, and there's no argument there. The issue is no spin, but also Australia generally had a 5th or a 6th bowler who could take wickets, right? So, Carl Hooper averages, 47 or something with a ball in Test cricket. Viv Richards didn't take many wickets in Test cricket. Australia had both War brothers. They had Michael Bevan for about 40 wickets at one stage. They had Andrew Simons at various stages. So they had guys who could come in and get wickets in other conditions when they were needed. So I just think it's a little bit more deeper in that way, whereas West Indies' deepness is all in one thing. And it's an overlap, right? It's all in fast bowling, whereas no one's having a go at Larry Gomes or Gus Logie or anything. But you look at the players who batted at, number 6 and number 7 for Australia. It's a big step down from what Australia had, I think.
Cali Charan was a wonderful player as well, was around for a while. Larry Gomes, who you've mentioned, was a real glue sticker, which allowed other players to play around in the flamboyance of Clive Lloyd and Viv Richards, opening pair as good as you'll ever get. And this potent attack. The other thing,
but Australia
they were massive. These I'm talking about 6'6", 6'7" guys bowling quickly
in an era where there weren't 6'6" guys. Yeah, well, it is worth remembering that.
Also, they changed the laws, didn't they? So towards the back end of the 70s and the early 80s, the West Indies could just bounce, right? And then they changed the law.
Change it. You were restricted by the number of bounces. Well, I mean, Clive was quite upset about it. That, you know, that he's restricting our weapons.
Yeah. So would that have been maybe another thing that went in advantage of the?
Yeah.
I don't
Aussie
think
side?
they bowled as many bounces when you go back and look at. If you go back and look at unedited footage, it's not bounces like compared to. We have more bounces bowled today than the West Indies bowled back then. What they bowled was back of a length.
Yeah.
And kept you pinned to the crease.
Yeah.
But if you go, I just want to go through it because he said something really interesting. He said one of the greatest opening partnerships of all time. But Australia had Hayden and Langer.
Yes.
I think Viv Richards is a better player than Ricky Ponting, but there's not a lot between them.
Not negligible.
Right? So then, you know, when you start to go through it spot by spot, right? Steve Waugh and Clive Lloyd kind of nullify each other out a little bit in that, right? Like I would probably have Clive Lloyd slightly higher. But then as you go further through, the Australians sort of start to pick up, right? Like if you look at who they can bat at, 5, 6 and 7 and everything from that point of view. So I don't think there's a clear answer. But if you look at the most all-round team, neither of these are the most all-round teams. The most all-round teams are the teams without all-rounders.
8, 9, 10, 11 will be blown away. I know what Warney were like against quick bowling.
Yeah.
He'd be number 8. They'd blow him away. They'd just blow him away.
I don't think the West Indian tail would make too many runs against
No,
Warren,
they wouldn't. No.
So again, that's not what I'm saying is those things are kind of nullified.
It wouldn't be a 5-day game.
No.
Well, and that's the other thing, having that strength in bowling depth, which you talk about, how important would that be if it would be a shorter game? One team wouldn't be batting for 120 overs, would they?
Yeah, it's just, so where the all-round thing comes in is there were times when the ball was swinging around and Australia could just give the ball to Steve Waugh or Andrew Simons or whoever it may
I'm
be.
missing a West Indies all-rounder. Eldine Baptiste?
No, so they had...
a bit later, is that?
Well, they didn't really use their all-rounders, did they? By the time they were good, they'd gone... there is one... Bernard Julian?
Yep,
so he played in, the late 70s, but they got rid of him by the time they got good.
Got the quicks, the big quicks.
And then really, they never played with it. I mean, until Phil Simmons bowls for them in the early 90s, they don't have another all-rounder.
Do you know, I remember from playing with Clive, I remember the change. He was captain and they had, I think it was Inshan Ali and Jumadine.
Yeah.
And he just said, no, because people were milking them, keeping them on, knocking them around, being comfortable. And he said, no, we're just playing the quicks.
Tell me what happens when Shane Warne at his peak plays against Viv Richards at his peak.
It'd be really interesting.
Good challenge.
He's a very good player of spin.
Very good.
It's obviously not his speciality. He's a very good player of spin, but he wants to hit the ball across the line.
Yeah.
So how he would have gone up against, and we saw KP do quite well against Warne, but it depends on when you play him. I think Viv Richards would probably have preferred to play late career Warne when he had the slider and everything, whereas early career Warne, when the ball's drifting in, his hands probably would have gone, this got so nerdy and technical, sorry, bro, but his hands would have gone too far with the ball, whereas late career Warne, the ball wasn't drifting as much, right? Mm-hmm. So you could play across the line a little bit more. So I think he would have done okay. And Clive Lloyd versus him would have been interesting too, because he's a great player of spin.
Yeah, he was, and left-handed, which is coming in, his leg spinner's coming in. Greenwich was a complete player. Beautiful player, Gordon Greenwich. Lovely player, opening the batting. Good player of spin.
These are the two best sides, but are they the most all-round sides?
No, not an all-round side. I used to tease Clive and say, well, you've no balance, have you? You haven't got a balance, you haven't got a spinner.
Where's your spinner?
He said Joel's the spinner, he's the slowest of the four.
Because South Africa, in their great period, have Callis, who bowls about, 22 overs per game, but allows them to pick. To be fair, they didn't always have a great spinner in that period, but allowed them to pick a spinner like Paul Harris, who would just bowl defensively. And then you've got the modern Indian side, right? Where, their peak lineup of Bumrah, Shami, Ashwin, Jadeja, there's so much all-round skill in there, and they had great batters as well. But I don't think either of those sides are on the same level as Australia and the West Indies. And that's the most interesting thing is every cricket team in the world is always looking for their next all-rounder, and they're always putting an all-rounder in, trying to have an all-rounder, and yet the two best sides we've ever had basically didn't once Steve Waugh's hamstring went, They didn't really have an all-rounder, Australia, did they?
So going back to South Africa, so Donald, Pollock, Klusener. What was the spinner? Simo?
Pat Simcox.
Pat Simcox, yeah, a real character of a cricketer and never short of a word. But that was a good side. You know?
Yeah, they didn't have the batting, though.
No.
The next generation, when you get Smith, De Villiers, Amla, Gibbs. I mean, Gibbs is way underrated, by the way. You get all those guys with Callis as the rock in the middle, and then you have Intini, Philander, Morkel, Stain, Neil Wagner. You might as well head off to New Zealand, mate. You're not getting the game here. Like Andre Nell, who was a really good bowler who, doesn't even matter anymore. Elby Morkel, who probably would have played a lot of Test cricket for another team, didn't even get close to that
good
side.
keeper as well.
Yeah, so, they had, well, I would say that was their biggest weakness, but that's different.
Yeah, but he's still a decent keeper. That's a team of great players, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of great players.
No, definitely.
Some very good players.
And again, they could pick their best keeper in South Africa when no one else could because of that. So I think that team was so incredibly flexible.
So why doesn't that team
longevity? They
had about 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, they did have quite a long time.
I reckon.
Weren't they unbeaten overseas for
that? So that's the strength
9
of their
years
record.
or something?
But what's their weakness of their record? They didn't win enough at home.
Yeah.
Whereas Australia and the West Indies were brilliant away, not quite as good as South Africa, but brilliant away, and also absolutely dominant at home. Modern India, absolutely dominant at home and really good on the road. South Africa didn't have both sides of the coin, and there was a lot of times when you thought they should have won a series that they didn't win. That wasn't really the case with the West Indies or Australia, right? Like West Indies and Australia just won when they had to.
Do you think if India beat England, that series where they went home, they didn't play in Old Trafford, then they came back the next year and they lost that Basball Test, so they didn't win that series, and they lost, or they drew in, they never beat South Africa, did they? Do you think those two series, if they win those two series, and if they stayed and played in Old Trafford, I think they probably do.
They would have won that series,
match, right? They win that series. That South Africa series, for some reason, they seem to reserve their very worst for South Africa. And I can't quite work out why that is. But if they win those two series, do you think that elevates them up to a point where you are actually saying, hang on, this team was unbeaten at home for 13 years. It's won everywhere. It's won 2 Border Gavaskars in Australia. What more can this team do?
They were slightly more dominant at home than Australia was in their period.
Yeah.
And certainly more dominant than the West Indies was in their period. And it's more varied and there are more challenges and you have to get up for 2 Test series and everything. So I think if they'd won one of those, it probably gets them into that conversation. But you've got to remember the big thing is that, and this is why I rate the West Indies higher than Australia overall, right? So if you take the best teams, I might still go with Australia. But overall, West Indies did it in 2 different generations. They had one whole generation come through. Clive Lloyd disappears, and they keep dominating for another 8-9 years. When Garner is not playing, when Roberts is not playing, when Malcolm Marshall is not playing. Australia's great thing is 2 bowlers and a lot of great batters around it. The minute the bowlers leave, Australia drops off again, right? And that was the big thing for me with India. I really wanted to see what would happen when Ashwin and Jadeja were not the core of that side anymore. And the first thing that happened was Ashwin retired in the middle of a series and they lost it. But they also lost at the end to New Zealand. So that's why the West Indies is so remarkable. It's 2 clear generations. It's not just 3 great bowlers who happen to all be in the same period of time. You can get a great generation if you're lucky enough to have 3 great bowlers who overlap with ages like Cummins, Stark and Hazelwood. The West Indies, literally their bowling attack from 1976 through to 1994 is completely different.
But like you said, on a level playing field when there wasn't the money around and, everybody was about the same and they were very dominant.
So we agree, or you two agree?
We got there. We got there in the end.